around, round, get around, I get around, yeah, get around, round, round, I get around, I get around, round, round, I get around, get around, round, round, I get around.
In this presentation, we will be exploring the historical issues within the Summer of Love, a psychedelic art movement that took place in the 60s. The movement saw the birth of hippie culture with explosions of colours and patterns that contrasted dark political events that took place at the time. It was said that the 60s was one of the most revolutionary and confusing periods in the 20th century. Artists like Isaac Adrans created work that suggested psychological trips of a new spiritual world that portrayed a wider vision of awareness and mystical themes. Psychedelic art seemed to react to events of the 60s with love and colour, perhaps trying to distract away from the political pandemonium. New York Times wrote the 60s were far from laid back. It was a wired, confusing, with constant clashes of race, class, gender, politics, idealism and ideology. We want to look deeper into what the 60s were like for different members of a family, exploring different aspects of their lives from what they wore to what they ate.
This is a highly effective means of contraception. I think the figures currently being used indicate that it's about 99-point-something effective.
The introduction of birth control in 1961 gave women of the 60s a newfound sexual freedom, giving them a chance to delay motherhood, enter higher education, and of course enjoy more recreational sex. In this part of the presentation, we explore the life of an average woman living in the 1960s. Women were starting to make more of an appearance in the workplace, as well as gaining the opportunity to further their education. The 60s gave women a possibility for wider aspirations than just being a wife and a mother. There was still an expectation for women to marry. This pressure to become homemakers started from a young age. In schools, girls were taught cookery and domestic sciences, whereas boys weren't. It was seen as standard practice for women to get married, have children, and become homemakers. Until age 5, children were the full-time responsibility of a mother, as there was no such thing as nurseries. So a woman's life would revolve around looking after her husband and children.
Anyone for waffles and ice cream?
In 1967, children spent their time outdoors in the fresh air with their friends. There wasn't much of a range of indoor entertainment for children as there is today. Television had only just become a regular part within each household. There were no video games, only board games and toys that were powered by a child's imagination.
Can your little girl do this? Ballerina Cindy can. And that's not all she can do.
The very first Cindy doll was made in England by Pedigree. For years, toy makers thought that boys would not play with dolls, but they were proved wrong in the 60s by the sufficiently tough-looking soldier called Action Man. He was based on an American toy called G.I. Joe, and he was all the rage.
Flush him out. And here comes Action Man in the capture copter. Mission accomplished. Action Man.
As well as Action Man, the current space program Apollo 9 also had an influence on the toy production of the 1960s.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Towards the end of the 1960s, they saw the arrival of new ranges of battery-operated and electronic toys, which were sold at discount prices and they were heavily advertised on TV.
Get you all twisted and tangled, it's a twister. Spin the spinner and call the shop. Twister ties you up in a knot. That's Twister. Yeah, Twister.
Science fiction also influenced the freedom of invention in the 1960s. This resulted in new ways for children to play. The 60s gave us Twister, a game which the players are contorted themselves into unthinkable positions that could finish head to backside with their friends.
Yeah, Twister.
Spirograph!
1960s was also a good time for quirky new designs, with novel games and toys such as Twister, Magic Roundabout and Etch-a-Sketch all attracting interest. The Spirograph definitely stood out.
Spirograph! Fantastic!
Wowie!
Amazing! Phenomenal!
The fair was a popular choice for weekend entertainment. Amusements, rides and fun food were a great way for families and friends to spend their time together away from work.
You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you.
How the
The
youngsters...
1960s have been described as the heyday of the British circus. The famous names including the Chipperfields, Robert Burrows and the Blackpool Tower Circus parading their menagerie of animals to the paying public. At its peak, Billy Smart's circus toured with 200 animals, including elephants, lions, horses, polar bears, camels, sea lions and chimpanzees.
The average day of a wife would start by preparing breakfast for the rest of the family, making sure her husband was suitably attired for work and the children were prepared for school. For the rest of the day, she would carry out household tasks. 1954 saw the end of rationing, which meant the 60s were an exciting time for food. Complemented by the rise of immigration, it gave British food a whole new flavour. Indian and Chinese spices were now accessible, giving housewives the opportunity to be more experimental with food. An economic boom brought for an increase in the standard of living. Travel was now something that was not only for the upper class. The introduction to package holidays meant more and more people were able to travel around Europe. This played a key part in introducing new foreign foods to the dinner table. Dinner parties would often include spaghetti bolognese and wine, and not forgetting your cheese and pineapple hedgehog. The increase in convenient food also led to an explosion in advertising culture.
Coffee, that's what it tastes like. New Instant Max. Now a better blend of coffee beans, freshly perked for more fresh perked taste.
Andy Warhol was an artist who explored this idea of commercialism. His iconic screen prints brought everyday ordinary objects into a glamorous light. It was in 1962 he created his Campbell Soup can prints. The use of repetition mirrored the idea of a well-lit supermarket.
Oh, I just eat it every day. I still do.
This increase in convenience brought dissatisfaction to many housewives. The feminist Betty Friedan wrote her book The Feminine Mystique in 1963, where she expressed how she wanted something more than just a house, husband and children. The book explored feminism and the idealized image of a domestic family.
Here we were, American women, we had the best life in the world. What did we want? They didn't understand that we wanted to be thinking human beings and take responsibility of running this world equally with men.
We went put on this to peel potatoes.
Although the book was seen as extremely controversial, it injected Western women and men with an attitude for change. The women's liberation was a feminist movement which saw many feminist milestones in the 60s. For example, the Contraception Pill in 1961, the Marriage Women's Property Act in 1964, strikes for equal pay in 1967, and saw Barbara Castle become first state secretary in 1968. Women were gaining more and more freedom throughout the 60s, and fashion was no exception. Jackie Kennedy was a fashion icon, wearing simple and tailored sportswear as well as chic dresses and boxy designer hats, gave her the name for being one of the most stylish first ladies in American history. One of her most famous outfits was her pink dress, the dress she wore on the day of John F. Kennedy's murder in 1963. The dress was splattered with her husband's blood. Even so, she continued to wear it for 24 hours after the assassination, as she wanted everyone to see what they had done to John. The 60s saw a burst of colour and patterns. With the development of technology, fashion was able to spread faster through television. Icons such as Marilyn Monroe, Audrey Hepburn and Twiggy became fashion icons to women all over the world. Recreational drugs brought psychedelia into fashion, with bold prints and polka dots that mirrored what people would see on an acid trip.
purple lights reading sick. It just seems just too fantastic.
But when you take LSD and your conscience expanded, the number of possibilities and the number of perspectives dramatically multiplies.
Polka dots were an obsession of the artist Yayoi Kusama, who is now named Princess of Polka Dots. To her, polka dots were black holes of infinity, and her work expressed themes of anti-war and government through performance art and paintings. She would use dancers in her performances, covering them in polka dots and having them dance naked in places like the Statue of Liberty, breaking down the barrier between art and real life, giving her work a dreamlike quality that embraced the feeling of a new world, which is arguably what the 60s was all about. 60s art embraced this idea of a new world with a hippie attitude of peace and love. Artist Robert India created his love print in 1965 to be used as a Christmas card. His message as an artist was to, in his own words, cover the world with hope.
Which has become world famous. He had a show in 1966 where he presented 8 love paintings. It appeared right at the time of the counterculture revolution and was taken up as a talisman of the youth culture, free sex, free love, and appeared on trinkets all over the world.
Shaking all over.
English rock band from Liverpool in the 1960s. They became iconic in the music industry. Teenagers at the time would have listened to them on pirate radio, and so the BBC started to create programs that were targeted at their age.
There are rumors around that this is Britain's revenge for the Boston Tea Party. 3,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet, you guessed it, the Beatles. This rock and roll group has taken over as the kingpins of musical appreciation among the younger element. Some music critics call their harmony unmistakably diatonic. Others say it's pandiatomic. Parents say it's just plain pandemonium. Their first meeting with the American press brings forth an interview laced with quips and humor. You'd laugh, too, with a gross of $17 million last year. New York City cops are hard-pressed protecting the Beatles at their hotel. On every side, there is hero worship that recalls the heydays of Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. With one Beatle bedded with a sore throat, 3 of the quartet take an airing in Central Park. There was absolutely no truth to the rumor that the zoo's laughing hyena.
The hippie movement originated on college campuses in the United States among white middle-class students. The culture rejected standard narrative values and embraced Eastern religions and spiritual quests. They rejected materialism and commercialism and were suspicious of the government. A popular protest at the time was against the Vietnam War. The movement started the idea of peaceful protests, especially after the Kent State shootings of unarmed college students.
The tear gas first started down the Commons, then the guard moved up on both sides of Taylor Hall and forced the kids off the Commons. Then one group, I don't know how many there were, 50 maybe, perhaps more, perhaps less, moved down to the practice football field.
After you feed them, then what will we do? Will you ask them to leave?
They've got grievances, they've got demands. The demands on both sides. We have to talk.
And then there were a whole lot of kids around them. A few kids were throwing sticks and stones, but that was only a handful, not more than 10, 15. And then the guard shot some tear gas up on the hill to disperse the crowd, and the kids picked it up and threw it back.
We'll fly out. Start, we'll make a perimeter, a circle, right out in here. From the right, you move out. You start a big circle around here.
You don't talk during a state of emergency, Mike. You know that.
Look,
Come on.
I'm sorry, but
we'll
I don't
talk
want
as
people
soon as
shot.
we get this
I don't
settled
want
down.
people shot on this campus, just as a citizen of this campus.
Who wants people
All
shot?
right, but they're sitting quietly.
Okay, will you ask them to leave?
That's
area immediately. Leave this area immediately.
And all of a sudden I heard the shooting. And then I saw people dropping to the ground, and then I fell to the ground also, because I couldn't walk anymore. And
what the investigators have to determine then is whether indeed there was a sniper and whether the guard was justified in firing its weapons, or whether, as some people here believe, the guard, under the pressure of a rock-throwing attack, panicked and fired its weapons indiscriminately, killing 4 people. Ike Pappas, CBS News, at Kent, Ohio.
I guess the appeal for me was that, well, the music was great, the clothes were great. It was a social thing. I wanted to be part of that group. And also, our parents were rather strict at the time, so it was a good way to kind of piss them off by wearing clothes that they didn't like and growing your hair a little bit longer. And I actually used to wear clothes out the door in the morning, but would have my hippie stash of clothes outside, and I would change clothes before I went to school, just so I didn't get up, nervous at home, but also fit in better with my friends.
The Summer of Love was said to peak in 1976. The festival that sums up the psychedelic era was the Human Bee. The festival took place in San Francisco at Golden Gate Park on the 14th of January. It was a place where young people could enjoy music from bands like Jefferson Airplane, Big Brother, The Grateful Dead, and listen to speakers, poets, and comedians who embraced the humanist values and outlawed reputation of the festival. San Francisco was the most publicized location of the youth culture at the time. It saw the birth of the hippie culture as it developed from disaffected student communities who wanted to make change in the world. The movement explored themes of personal empowerment, culture and political decentralization, communal living, ecological awareness, higher consciousness, and what they're most well known for, the acceptance of drug use. Lots of the ideology and imagery of the hippie movement seem to echo experiences from LSD. Although this is viewed as a negative, it's difficult not to enjoy the creativity that comes from it. Psychedelic art had a purpose to transcend the physical world and portray a wider vision of awareness, including spiritual and mystical themes. We hope you have enjoyed the presentation and learned a lot from our video. Thanks for watching.